Okay, thank you very much. I think I'll start the session first of all. And it's a pleasure to be in this FACO Nightmare course. And we have a host of top faculty with us, as you all know very well. And most important is we have Dr. Atya Agarwal, and then we have Dr. Suhas Haldipurkar, and we have Gaurav Luthra. I thought we'll start with Dr. Atya to talk to us on FACO Nightmares and see how the system moves. We'll have some question and answers also. And followed that, I'll speak and then come back to Suhas and Gaurav Luthra. So Atya, can you start sharing your screen?
Just 1 second. I'll start playing my video. Start playing my video. Sure. Can you see my videos now?
वीडियो तो दिख रहा है, ऑडियो नहीं है.
ऑडियो नहीं है?
सब है.
No, I'm going to talk because my video is not going to play. I mean, my audio is not going to play on the video. Okay, this is a case which I'm going to show you. 1 second. Let me start from the beginning. Thank you very much, all the iOS members, Namrata, and everyone for giving us this course, because this course is very close to our heart, the worst case scenarios. So I'm going to show you some of my worst videos which I have collected over so many years. This is a case of subluxated one-piece intraocular lens in which there is a PCR and the surgeon has tried to put a one-piece IOL inside. The iris is fully damaged. As you can see me here, I'm planning to do, in this case, nothing but a glued IOL. But if you see me carefully, I'm sitting at 12 o'clock and I'm going to measure my corneal diameter from limbus to limbus. And if the corneal diameter is not suitable for a 13.5 overall diameter of the intraocular lens, which I'm going to glue, I shift to something called vertical glued IOL, in which you can see I'm sitting exactly at 3 o'clock and I have created a flap at 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock instead of creating them at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. As you can see, we do something called a correct handshake technique, in which we have to externalize the haptic by using two hands, passing the haptic from one hand to another, for which the flaps have to be 180 degrees apart, for which I have actually made two scleral flaps 180 degrees apart. But in this case, these flaps are created at 12 o'clock. So now, under the scleral flap, which are partial thickness scleral flaps, you all know, I am going to create a 22 gauge sclerotomy under this scleral flap. This is, as I said, a one-piece non-foldable intraocular lens the surgeon has implanted. So I have gone with a 22 gauge needle and I have created scleral flaps, sclerotomies under the scleral flaps. And can you see my video? Has it gone? And then I'm using the two glued intraocular lens forceps, and I'm doing a handshake technique, going through the 22 gauge sclerotomy, and I am passing the haptic from one hand to another, and I'm seeing that I'm struggling here because the previous surgeon, what he has done is he has put the intraocular lens in such a way that it is gone and it is stuck to the iris, as you are seeing me struggling here. Now I have to manage in this case, releasing the haptic by using the handshake technique, and also I have to distangle it from the iris in which the haptic is actually stuck. Be careful, you have to do this very slowly, otherwise you are going to create an entire iridodialysis in this case. So this has to be done in a gentle way. So I'm doing it slowly, haptic getting released little bit. Once again, I'm doing two glued intraocular lens forceps, and I'm trying to disentangle this haptic from the iris. Finally, I have finished that. Holding the tip of the haptic, it's very important in all the glue dial procedures that you stick only to the tip of the haptic. Mind you, I also told you this is a one-piece intraocular lens which the surgeon has implanted. I'm not removing this intraocular lens. I'm going to convert this into a glue dial using the same one-piece non-foldable intraocular lens into a glue dial technique. So tip of the haptic is very important. Without disfiguring it, you have to externalize it. So I have to take it inside and bring it through the sclerotomy on one side. So the first haptic is externalized. Normally, I would have preferred to do it on the left-hand side, but in this case, I don't have a choice. Whichever I caught first, I did it. Now, once again, what I did was through a side port incision, which I created initially, one for the second glue dial forces, one for doing a little bit of sclerotomy because there is doing a vitrectomy because there's a bit of vitreous there, which is not only stuck to the haptic, there's also a remnants of the anterior and posterior capsule there, which I do not need in the case of a glue dial. So a little bit of anterior vitrectomy and going under the sclerotomy to the second glue dial forces. Once again, the handshake technique is coming into play till I see the tip of the haptic, and holding on to the tip of the haptic, I'm going to externalize the second haptic. The first haptic is actually there lying on the scleral bed. My assistant either tries to hold me, or if I don't want my assistant to hold it, I can use something called tags of the IV tube. Once finished doing that, you have to create the scleral pockets, which we call it Chariot's tunnel, because a friend Chariot taught us how to do it, Gabor Chariot from Germany. So first haptic was externalized and tucked. The second haptic is tucked into the scleral pockets, but you have to be careful that these scleral pockets are created not too deep, not too superficial. I will tell you later on about this. This iris was very badly damaged. So you all know Dr. Agarwal, I think today whole day he'd been teaching you all how to do a single pass fourth row pupilloplasty. This is such an easy technique. Even I can do it. You can make anybody do this technique. In this, nothing but a 26 gauge needle is passed through the periotomy, through the incision, corneal incision on the left-hand side, or a tenoproline suture, then create a knot. Once this knot is created, the needle is passed through the iris on either side. Without the iris pass, you cannot create a knot and cannot create it. You have to pass this pass 4 times into the knot which you have created, and then you have to oppose them very gently. Otherwise, you will tear this iris, which is already in a very badly damaged situation. So once one knot is there, you can see the pupil is now coming to a reasonably good size. And if it is not sufficient, you cannot leave such a big gap between the two iris on either side. So I did a second single pass through fourth row pupilloplasty and moved on to the other side, and I've created another single pass fourth row pupilloplasty, and I'm trying to bring this pupil to normal size. There are 2 peripheral iridectomies which I'm not going to stitch. They are under the scleral flap. They are not going to interfere with you. Triamcinolone is injected to see if there are vitreous in the anterior chamber. We can see the trocar maintainer on the left-hand side, the orange one. Either you can use a trocar AC maintainer behind the limbus, or you can use it in the anterior chamber. Fibrin glue, which is a combination of fibrinogen and thrombin, was put. And this is how the patient looked pre-operatively and post-operatively, with a vision of 6/9, which is actually a boon to the patient. So the patient is very happy with this vision. Having finished that, I'll move on to my next video, so which is going to be once again a disaster. Just give me a minute.
Click on the top for the green area.
Yeah. This is once again a case of Marfan syndrome. And in this case also, if you see carefully, the horizontal diameter in this case is more than the vertical diameter from limbus to limbus. And this is a Marfan syndrome, a young patient. And this patient has been sent to us for managing not only with a lensectomy, also we cannot leave this patient aphakic. So we are planning a gludial in this case. The marking has to be done for which we are cutting the conjunctiva. In this case, I'm marking in the center because of the subluxation. You will not know. So you see the Purkinje images are there in the center. This is a very good marker started by Dr. Ashwin Agarwal, made by Epsilon. I have no financial interest in any of the devices I'm talking about. Using the Ashwin's Epsilon marker, I'm creating the flap 180 degrees apart. But once again, this is a vertical gludial because the flaps are created at 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock. And I'm sitting actually at 3 o'clock to do the gludial, which we have actually managed to learn over the past so many years. We started gludial in the year 2007. So after creating the scleral flaps, I use a little bit of the blue ink so that I don't miss the markings. So a partial thickness scleral flaps are made. You can either use a trocar just behind the limbus, 1 or 2 millimeters behind the limbus, because of we want constant infusion of BSS or saline inside the eye. In any of these gludial procedures, we cannot use any viscoelastics. So we have to have continuous infusion inside the eye, which can be either like this, trocar behind the limbus, or you can use a trocar AC maintainer or any Blumenthal's cannula if we have. So once after creating the two small side port incision with a 15-degree blade, I'm starting to do a lensectomy because this is a young patient. You don't have to use a phacoemulsification probe in this. With a Vitrec 23 gauge vitrectomy probe itself, slowly I'm doing this. Now, if you see me doing something here, I have created scleral flaps. I'm going to create a 22 gauge sclerotomy. But before that, what am I doing? Using the same cutter, I'm going to create a peripheral iridectomy under the scleral flaps. It has to be exactly in the periphery. You should not use too much of the power. Use very little power. I'll come back to it to tell you why I did that. Now, through the peripheral iridectomy, a 22 gauge anterior sclerotomy is created under the scleral flap, which actually passes through the peripheral iridectomy. I'll tell you the reason why I'm doing it. Once again, after doing that on one side, I started doing my lensectomy. But when you come near the iris, be careful because we do not want to any way cut off the iris. We don't need any capsule. The remnants of the capsule also will be taken off with the cutter. This is a 23 gauge cutter. So once I finish doing that, I'm going to thoroughly do the capsulectomy and peripheral iridectomy also under the scleral flap. If you are not very careful, then you can put a big iridectomy there. We don't want to do that. Just a small peripheral iridectomy. If you are not sure, then you can use your endo eliminator to see exactly what you're doing under the scleral flaps. I have gone 0.5 millimeter and done an anterior sclerotomy because why I'm doing this is before I inject the lens, because the overall lens diameter in any of these 3-piece IOLs which are putting for gludial are not more than 13 to maximum 13.5, and these are big eyes. Also, I have done a vertical gludial, but we do not get insufficient haptics outside, externalize it, for us to tuck under the scleral flaps and later on also to glue it. So if you go slightly anteriorly, but be careful, do not go too anterior, otherwise you'll land up with scleral bleeding and it'll be sitting and clearing the blood. Or you should not go too far. Exactly 1 millimeter is the exact size in a normal gludial. But in the cases in which the eyes are large, the limbus to limbus diameter is more than, let's say, 11 to 11.5, then you can do this anterior sclerotomy after doing a 0.5 millimeter peripheral iridectomy behind and then externalizing the haptic so that you have haptic tip is grasped. This is called a lucky 7 sign. Assistant is rotating the injector for me. If you don't have an assistant, you can do all this. Assistant is also holding my first haptic, which is externalized. Using the hand technique, I'm able to visualize the tip of the haptic and externalize both of them. Once both the haptic is enough of the haptics have been externalized, due to the anterior sclerotomy, you can ask your assistant to leave the haptics. You can see the lens is now beautifully centered. The main port which I have created a 2.8 millimeter incision is now sutured. Using a 26 gauge needle, we are creating intrascleral pockets, which I said earlier should not be too deep or too superficial. Using a 26 gauge needle, we are creating the flaps 180 degrees apart and under the sclera, which we call it Chariot's pocket or intrascleral pockets, using a 26 gauge needle. And once you create them of enough depth, you should flex the haptic back and then start tucking them one by one. I finished doing on one side, then I'm going to do the same thing using a 26 gauge needle. Also, I use the bluing to mark so that I do not miss the exact channel through which the haptic has to be tucked inside. Once you finish doing that, you have to fix the sclera nicely so that you can tuck the haptic nicely. And I'm going to pull the iris in all the directions and see if the pupil is coming back to normal or not. If you see infusion is still on there till you finish suturing everything, intraocular pilocarpine to see if the pupil has become round. The previous case, the pupil was very bad, so we did an SFT. In this case, the haptics are tucked nicely. You can see the peripheral iridectomy. Trocar cannula is now removed after putting the air, because why we should remove it after putting the air is we don't want any hypotony to occur. As soon as you remove the infusion, the eye might collapse and it will remain collapsed till the next day. We don't want any hypotony to occur. So put a drop of air into the anterior chamber and then only remove the Trocar AC maintainer or the Trocar infusion cannula, and now take the combination of fibrinogen thrombin, which is a tissue product. We call it a fibrin glue, and you not only glue the scleral bed one by one, we can also glue the conjunctiva and use the same glue for even suturing the side port incisions created on the side. Post-operatively, this patient has got vision of 20/20. Can I continue with one more video?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Atya, explain.
Okay, if you see carefully here, what I'm showing you is a white ring. Animation for gluteal. Scleral flaps are created 180 degrees apart. Scleral flaps are lifted up. Infusion cannula either behind the limbus. Gluteal scaffold for Sommering ring. This is what I'm trying to show you. The haptics are externalized. They're tucked using a 26 gauge needle. And using the iris hooks, we can visualize something which is a white thing. I'm going to explain to you what exactly is this. In the year 1828, there's a guy called Sommering who described these rings, which are nothing but a ring which is seen only when you dilate the pupil. As I'm preparing this patient for gluteal scleral flaps, you know all the procedures now. I want to talk to you a little bit on Sommering ring. These are nothing but, if you see carefully here, there is a white thick ring which is actually behind the iris. I've created scleral flaps, but you should dissect them up with the limbus. You should start seeing the limbus till you are seeing blue. This is very important because you don't have much of the haptics which can be externalized. So you have to go slightly anterior, just 1 millimeter behind the limbus. Infusion cannula is gone behind, Trocar infusion cannula. And then sclerotomy is created behind the sclera, 1 millimeter behind the limbus using a 22 gauge needle. These rings are nothing but, if you see, the center part of the eye is actually aphakic. There's nothing there. It is nothing but due to some kind of myopia or something. Fusaka, he used to do an operation called Fusaka's operation, in which, because of trauma, if there is a cataract, they used to just remove the nucleus in the center, and these patients are young, and leave the capsules and the cortical material behind. Over the years, what happens to it? These all become adherent. The anterior capsule, the posterior capsule, the cortical remnants, they all become adherent to each other, and they form a ring surround 380 degrees apart, which is actually behind the iris. The patient do not have any problem with this vision because the center is clear, because either the lens is absorbed automatically or by any procedure like an extracapsular extraction or just a needling procedure or even Fusaka's operation. The surgeon has left the remaining things there, and over the years, these have become a ring, and they go and sit behind the iris. Patients have been sent to us for managing the aphakia. Patients do not have any problem with the vision. The rings have not dislodged, but they are remained aphakic, and now they want to get the aphakia corrected. In these cases, it is not possible for us to do a posterior chamber intraocular lens because you have to go through the ring, and it is not possible to implant the lens in the posterior chamber. So that's why we have to address these patients. And I'm doing a glued IOL in this case, and I'm going to show you something called a glued IOL scaffold, in which before I could even manage the ring, which is behind the iris, I've implanted the intraocular lens. I'm going through the sclerotomy, caught hold of the first haptic, externalized it, left it there for the assistant to hold it, using the handshake technique, and once again going through the sclerotomy. But be careful, you have to go past that white ring which is behind the iris, and then hold on to the haptic, and sometimes you can even go past this ring and you'll be in trouble because we had a problem like that. I went past through the ring. Now the haptics have to be externalized, and they're tucked inside. Now, once you finish tucking this, you have to manage this ring because you cannot leave it there. You can visualize it only if you move the iris. You have to bring this ring into the anterior chamber because these rings are not going to come through your vitrectomy probe. So you have to dilate the pupil by using the iris hooks and then manage these rings one by one. So on one side, 180 degrees, I have done. I'm trying to remove this with the vitrector. Then impossible. This is not going to come out. So what am I doing? I'm going to release this addition of this Sommering ring from the adhesion in the periphery to the vitreous, clearing these adhesions, break the adhesions, and at the same time, my intraocular lens, which is gone inside, is used as a scaffold, or I have created my own posterior capsule so that these rings do not get dislodged posteriorly. Now I am doing a phacoemulsification to remove these rings because they are not going to come with the vitrector. I did this on one side. Once I finished doing that, little bit of vitrectomy on that side, and I've gone to the other side using the iris hook. I've dislodged the ring, brought it anteriorly, using my intraocular lens as a scaffold. I've taken a phaco probe. I'm going to manage this ring, Sommering ring on the other side. You do clearing the additions one by one and dislodge this Sommering ring, bring them anteriorly. Iris hooks are going to help me, and also my intraocular lens is going to help me not to dislodge this Sommering ring behind it or in the posteriorly, so that I don't have to go fishing for them through 3-port vitrectomy. Once I finish doing that, I'm going to manipulate and bring the iris back to normal, suture, put the air, remove the trocar AC maintainer using the fibrinogen thrombin combination, the fibrin glue, and glue not only the flap, the conjunctiva, the paracentesis so many have created, and I'm going to show you just post-operatively how this patient is going to look, and I'm going to be done with this. The main port was sutured. The glue is going to use to suture all the paracentesis which I have created for putting iris hooks, everything. And this is how the patient looked post-operatively 1 month with a vision of 20/20. And thank you very much for being so patient to hear me. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Amar.
Thank you very much, Dr. Athiya. We have Suhas with us. Suhas? Suhas. So
Yes,
question basically here is, when we have sommering rings,
Yeah.
is there any trick which you do? Because one of the problems with sommering ring, as Atya showed, and I want to tell the delegates, the question comes, why do we remove them? One, they can fall down. Two, they can produce an inflammation. And third, they can produce an IOL tilt. What trick do you suggest, Suhas, for us to use in sommering ring? We started this glued IOL scaffold, which we are using routinely in sommering rings. But do you have any other trick?
Well, frankly, no, because every time I have tried to remove Sovereign's ring, a bit of it does fall in. And unless you do glued IOL or scleral fixation, use it like a scaffold, it's not possible. I think it's a brilliant concept, a simple one, but that's the only way probably you have to go, because it is, no matter how much you try, a bit of it is going to fall in.
Yes, I think that is the problem. Because see, what happens, to tell the delegates, all of you, remember, the vitrectomy probe doesn't chew it up. Okay, you need to remove it with a phaco probe.
Yeah.
It's too thick. So that was one of the things which I thought we should bring up back again on thing here. I'll just share my screen here for a minute, and I'll just talk. Now, I thought a lot of talk has been talked, and I'll come back to Suhas asking you also on this topic on the fourth row pupilloplasty technique. But I thought many people want to learn it. So just to recap it, simply take a Prolene needle. See if the animation, you go through clear cornea, then through iris. I'm holding it. Now, on the other hand, I'm holding it, but this side we have a paracentesis. Take a 30 gauge needle. You can take a 26 gauge needle, which is what we started off with, but now we have gone smaller to a 30 gauge needle, whichever is available. Go through iris, railroad the two. Once you have railroaded the two, the next step is bring this loop out. Now, remember the number 4, pass it 4 times, and that is over. Simply game, set, and match. Because now all you need to do is pull on either side. And once you have pulled on either side, you'll see that is complete. In other words, you don't need to do again second pass or a third pass. Normally people do 3, 2, 2 or something like that. Here you have just done once, 4, 0. That's it. Now you do the same thing on the other side, and you have a complete pupil as much as you want. One of the problems we have is this Urit-Zavalia syndrome. In Urit-Zavalia, as you can see, one of the biggest problems is the pupil is dilated. In this case, there is no glaucoma, but the pupil is dilated. So what we have done is we have fixed a fluid in the eye. This was post-glued IOL in which the patient developed a Urit-Zavalia syndrome. So again, you can see now in the surgery, I'm taking the needle through clear cornea. Don't pass a paracentesis on both sides. It becomes very tough and not needed at all. You need paracentesis only on one side. Bring it out. Now, just bring this loop out. Once the loop comes out, and you can see, I'm just going to bring this loop out there. You'll see there. Now I go in with the forceps and catch that and bring him out. Once that is out, again, as I said, the number 4, very simple number to remember, pass it 4 times. While passing, if you forget how many times you have passed, let's say you have passed 4 times, but you've forgotten and you thought it's 3, put one extra 5, nothing will happen. But don't underdo it. Have it always at 4, definitely, or even more, doesn't matter. Now you can see the pupil is round and nice. You can do the cerclage, but again, in a cerclage takes so much of time, whereas this finishes in no time. Now take the difficulty higher. You have a Urit-Zavalia in a penetrating keratoplasty. Look at the anterior segment OCT. It's closed angle. These patients' pressure will be high. That means there is Urit-Zavalia where pupil is dilated, and on top of that, there is a glaucoma also. So now how do we manage these cases? Again, let's see it. What I'm going to do is, we have just opened up this angle. By pulling on the iris like this, the closed angle will become open and the fluid will start flowing back to normal. So here you can see how the closed angle will become an open angle. Now, you can do a 6-point traction or a 4-point traction depending on how severe the case is by and large. But here you can see there now, I have done here trocar AC maintenance. I like to have fluid in the eye because it helps me much better off all the time. Once I've got fluid in the eye, I'm much safer. And remember, this is a penetrating keratoplasty eye. So we have to be careful when we are doing the surgery. Now you see I'm passing this single pass fourth row pupilloplasty, catching it and bringing the loop out, and again passing times, bringing the pupil down to normal. One more thing, remember, in a penetrating keratoplasty, if you make it a pinhole, even the astigmatism which is there will get nullified. But here we are talking here of solving the Uritz-Zavalia syndrome problem. Let's see the pre-op. Look at the anterior segment OCT pre-op and look at the post-op. Look at the pressure also has improved so well. The patient's vision has improved and the intraocular pressure has also come down drastically. So now let's take another problem. Silicone oil. Lots of people, retinal surgeons, if they're watching this, you have silicone oil in the eye. Now the problem, and I think Suhas, your son-in-law is a retinal surgeon also.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you have silicone oil in the eye, they have glaucoma sometimes. About 10% of the cases will be landing up with this SOS glaucoma, silicone oil synechiae glaucoma. So when you remove the silicone oil, it does not solve the problem. What I tell people is, please do an anterior segment OCT pre-op. Check. In this case, patient had high pressure. What I'm going to do is do the fourth row pupilloplasty. Now look at the anterior segment OCT pre-op and post-op. And you can see the huge difference in that the pressure becomes normal. Another question comes, can we dilate? Yes, we can. We published this in the JCRS also in 2017 with drop, because in the fourth row pupilloplasty, the remaining areas can open up. Can we combine it with pre-Descemet's endothelial keratoplasty and gluediol? Look at this patient pre-op, post-op. This patient came to me from Bombay, referred by Dr. Natarajan. You can see it was operated 6 times. We are operating the 7th time, and see we have done a gluediol, fourth row pupilloplasty and PDEC. And that's why we do PDEC and not DMEC or DSEC. Look at another case. This was a one-eyed patient, failed PK, but look at the anterior segment OCT below. We have done a fourth row pupilloplasty with PDEC. Again, you can see pre-op and post-op pictures. Just to tell people on this simple topic on this here is, we always do PDEC because of the advantages being there. I'll come to that later on. Finally, I thought we'll cover up a pinhole pupilloplasty also, in which case what we are doing is making the pupil 1.5 millimeters. The peripheral rays are getting blocked. Now what happens is the rays from the center hit directly inside the foveal area. This patient had an astigmatism of 24 diopters. There is no way you can correct this by any other way. So what we did was, you have DALC, you can do a pinhole IOL, but simple thing in this case is to do a pinhole pupil. Look at the patient pre-op, and again post-op, the patient's vision improved to 6/12 vision. So I thought we'll show you this particular various techniques which we thought I'll show you about on how this is done. Now I thought I'll move on to another thing which I wanted to show you about, and I'll just show it in a second. Look at this patient here. This patient again has a very, very bad cornea. But what I wanted to show you here is, look at the iris. This patient was from Poland and he was a top actor there. He had some problem. He was operated for the cataract surgery and still not seeing. And on top of that, there was such a huge iridodialysis. Now I'm making a scleral groove. I'm taking off this epithelium to see better, because obviously I'm not able to see anything with that epithelium like that. Now, once that's done, my next step is I'm going to fix a trocar AC maintainer. Once the trocar AC maintainer is fixed, you can see there I'm fixing that trocar AC maintainer. I have fluid in the eye. Now, question comes, how do you fix this iridodialysis? Here I'm fixing right opposite the iridodialysis another trocar AC maintainer. And here you see the trocar going into the eye. You can use it passing through the cornea or through the limbus or through the scleral portion 0.5 millimeter. Either way, the game plan is very simple. I'm now going to use a double arm Prolene needle. So you see that now I'll just use this double arm. It goes through this trocar. This is the trocar assisted iridodialysis repair technique. I now catch this iris there. Once the iris is caught, from the other side, see the groove which we have got there? From this groove side, I'm going to pass the 30 gauge needle. Now railroad the two. Once you have railroaded the two, this needle comes out. So far, so good. Now you have the second arm of the double armed. You just have to pass it again through the trocar. If I did not have the trocar, the problem with this hangback technique, which was started by Michael Snyder and which we have now modified to this, is if you pass it through a clear corneal incision, it can get stuck in the corneal lips. With the trocar, another advantage is it not only does not get stuck in the lips, but you can guide it. So I'm using the trocar to guide my needle wherever I want it to go. Once it is going through the iris, now I go through the other side, a 30 gauge needle, and you will see me locking onto that, bringing it out. Once that second portion of the double arm comes out, all we need to do is suture it. So now you'll see me now suturing this whole system back in place there. And once that's done, you'll see the iridodialysis pulled in place. Now you can do more of this wherever you want. So you can see another area where the iridodialysis is still there. So that area also will do the same procedure exactly like what I showed you about. Remember one thing, iris repair in cataract surgery is extremely important in today's scenario, because this can do so many things which will make the patients extremely happy. Again, you can see the first arm passed. Now the second arm has been passed. Both arms will be pulled. All we need to do is just tie it across. Now in the bargain, if you notice, the pupil has become quite large. I'm trying to break any synechiae which are present there, because if there is any closed angle, it will become open angle by this. Here you can see I'm breaking those synechiae there. Once I have broken this synechiae, I will then move on to the two-fold technique. In other words, I want to make this pupil a bit smaller. So now we have done the trocar assisted iridodialysis. Now we will do the single pass fourth row pupilloplasty. So you can see now I'm just going to pass the needle into the iris through clear cornea. From the other side, as I told you, we have a paracentesis, 30 gauge needle goes inside, railroad the two. Once they are brought out, you see the whole thing just coming out. And once that is out, then bring this loop out. Once the loop is out, all you need to do is put the number 4 into the system there, put it 4 times, and you'll see this pupil becoming small. We might not be able to make the pupil too small because it's so badly traumatized, but as much as you can, make it so that the patient will be very, very happy post-operatively. If you have made the pupil too small, remember you can always use a vitrectomy probe to enlarge it. Here you can see I'm doing the fourth row pupiloplasty on the top portion, and when you do that, it's become like a slit. So I'm going to use the vitrectomy probe to enlarge it. My game plan is very simple. I want that Purkinje image to be centered onto the pupillary area post-operatively. So here you can see there on table also, it is centered very well. Now, once you have done this, then the next portion comes into play, and that is do a PDEC. Now, question here is very simple. Why don't we do DMEC or DSEC? The problem in DSEC is it is too thick. You take an 80 micron, 100 micron, whatever you're using. In DMEC, you're taking 15 microns. But the problem all of you understand is the donor, you cannot strip the endothelium till the donor is 50 years or 40 years. In PDEC, any age. So we use always the young donors. Here it's a very simple procedure just to complete this clipping here, where we have created this type 1 bubble, made the PDEC graft, and then we will inject it inside the eye and unroll it. The another advantage in PDEC you'll notice is the patients post-operatively rebubblings don't occur. Very, very rare to see rebubbling. And also on table, you can manipulate the tissue. So once my graft is in place, I will unroll that graft and make it absolutely bang on track. So here you can see the graft in place there, centered as much as I want, wherever I want it, and fill it up with air. Now the question comes, how did this patient behave? As I told you, he was a top actor from Poland who had come to us for surgery. Post-operative, day 3, you can see the patient. 3 weeks post-op, the patient improved to 6'9", and you can see the final picture, 2 months post-op, the vision has already improved to 6'6". So now that we have seen various scenarios, which I thought I'll show you one more clipping. On this. Now look at another problem of nightmare situation which we can have here. This patient had an anterior chamber IOL. Now the problem in these AC IOLs are they do create a lot of problems. So what we have done is I wanted to remove this AC IOL. We have made two scleral flaps 180 degrees apart. I made a scleral tunnel incision also to explant the anterior chamber IOL. But watch what I'm trying to show you here is you're making my sclerotomies 1 millimeter behind the limbus. But the problem here is this anterior chamber IOL is firmly stuck. Look how firmly it is stuck to the iris. And that is why I suggest people to move into the intrascleral haptic fixation through any technique you'd like the Yamane or the glued IOL. We prefer the glued IOL because of the tilt factor is very, very less in it, but choice is yours. Once you have done removal of the haptic from the iris, our next step will be to explant the IOL. I had to cut the haptic because it was just not coming out. So now we're going to do a vitrectomy. And when we are doing the vitrectomy portion, I'm trying to check on that pupillary area there. You can see there, I'm in slight trouble because you can see there's iris was so badly traumatized. I'm still not able to release it. And there's something white behind. And if you realize, it's exactly what Dr. Athiya was talking to us on a Sommering ring. It was lying behind the iris there, which on that iridodialysis only we could see. So we have taken off this broken haptic there. But remember that portion of the Sommering ring is still present inside the eye. Now I'm going to take off the second portion. And again, I'm going to cut it here, take it off there. Once I have taken off the second portion, then I'm going to use iris hooks because I can't see clearly at all. So I'm going to use the iris hooks to enlarge this area there. Here you can see the iris hooks being used. I'm going to do that vitrectomy now. Once I've done my vitrectomy, my next step is to see what do I do with this Sommering ring. You can see it can just fall down anytime. Here you can see the next iris hook being fixed there in place there. Now question comes to do the glued IOL. So I already have a large incision. So I'm going to fix the glued IOL in place just like a non-foldable IOL. One haptic comes out. The second haptic with the handshake technique, Dr. Athiya has already spoken to us on that topic. Now, once I have done that, I suture up that wound. And my next step is to take the 26 gauge needle, create the Gabor-Chariot's pocket and fix them inside. Now you can see what we have to do here is simple. I need to take off the Sommering ring. So I'm going to now try to dislodge the Sommering rings, bring them to the center so that I'm comparatively safer because the IOL now is working like a scaffold. Doing some more vitrectomy there. Once that is out, you can just burp it out or you can phaco it. In this case, it was coming out very comfortably. So I just burped it out. The second portion of the Sommering ring is also coming out now there. And you can see that finally portion coming out. Once both the whole Sommering ring has come out, now my next portion is to check how much of vitreous is there in the front, clear it all off. Once that is done, we will have to remove the iris hooks. Now remember, we do have that iridodialysis problem there. So we have to solve that problem. And I just told you, we can solve an iridodialysis repair very easily nowadays with it. Here you can see, I'm passing this hang-back technique just to show it on the animation, how you are doing the hang-back technique. Once the hang-back technique has been done, then very simply, you can combine it with a single pass 4-throw pupilleplasty. So here you can see now the hang-back technique of Michael Snyder being done. Once that's done, I'm now going to do the 4-throw pupilleplasty and bring that pupil down. So in other words, again, in this case, we have combined both the hang-back or the trocar-assisted iridodialysis and the single pass 4-throw pupilleplasty and brought the pupil down. Remember, the Purkinje image has to be bang centered. So see how you can bring that pupil down as much as possible to make the patient post-operatively very nice. There is a problem in this iris, there is no doubt about it, but still things can be still done well. And you can see the Purkinje image P1 at the center still comfortably there. Remember, the inverted Purkinje is the P4. So don't worry about that. Look at the Purkinje image P1. I'm going to perhaps enlarge the pupil to make it more comfortable. And this basically completes this case here by ending it with the fibrin glue. So this is how the patient looks on table, and subsequently this patient on post-operative day 1 improved to 6'9". So you can see here now pre-op, intra-op, and 1 month post-op, this same patient. Saying that, I'd like now to stop sharing my screen, and I'll ask Dr. Suhas. Suhas?
Yes, yes, tell me.
Suhas. So before we ask you to talk, just any comments which you have, because you have been doing pinhole pupiloplasty and other techniques. Your comments, Suhas.
Well, I mean, these are cases, which are far beyond, what we would do. But my concern when I do pinhole pupiloplasty, which I have shared once before with you, especially in post-RK and post, those AK cases where you do it, and those are all myopes. So, like you did show in one of your, part where pupil does dilate, but that pupil doesn't dilate big enough if retinal surgeon wants to see peripheral retina. So how do you address that?
That's a good question. Now, the point here is you will be able to see, perhaps you might not see peripheral retina, but let's take a theoretical example. Some years later, the patient develops a detachment. If he develops a retinal detachment, all you need to do is take the laser, shoot on the iris, and you have back to square one position that you have a dilated pupil. But that is a flip side of the pinhole pupiloplasty. There is no doubt. You will not be able to see exactly peripheral retina as much as possible. So what we do in those cases is, if the pupil is very well dilated, like in the case I showed you in your course, check the peripheral retina thoroughly so that when you bring it down, you know you're comparatively safer.
Yeah, I think that's probably the answer. Yes.
Suhas, can you share your screen also then?
Yeah.
And you can put on your video of yourself. We're not able to see you, Suhas.
Okay.
So before Suhas starts, I just wanted to introduce Suhas. There are very few people, and I was in his course just previously, who are such good speakers. Suhas, can you put on your video for visualizing you?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. Okay, bang on. So Suhas has got such a super practice in Panvel, in Navi Bombay, and perhaps one of the top surgeons in the country. He also educates people all around the world on training program. And not only that they are coming to him, but he goes to Europe and conducts courses hands-on, teaching them exactly how to do this difficult phaco surgeries. Suhas, all over to you on the worst case scenarios of yours.
Thank you so much, Amar. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for talking all these nice things. I only hope I can measure up to that. Well, these cases shown in this presentation are not necessarily done by me alone, because I had to collect some cases for disaster. Now, when the air travels to areas where it has no business, now this is a very interesting case. Post-trauma, a patient develops an intumescent cataract with raised pressure, and the chamber is extremely shallow. So he's taken up for surgery, and the surgeon doesn't realize the status of zonular structure because it's difficult to know it. So as a practice, he goes with air and the stain, because obviously for a white cataract, you would stain. But at this stage, he realizes that the vitreous has started already coming out. So that means there is some gap, and he's already injected air and the stain. So naturally, you would expect some difficult issues a little later. So now the first job is to go ahead and check if there's a vitreous, and if it's there, maybe clear it before you go ahead with your rhexis. So the surgeon carries on with his rhexis. And then, as expected, an endocapsular ring is placed so that you're on a safer ground. The phaco is not really difficult here, but he prefers to do vitrectomy because the vitreous is already there in the AC. Now you notice some air coming in. So that means there's some air behind. When he did capsular staining, some air must have gone in. So that means there's a direct contact. So there's also a possibility that when he's doing phaco, a lot of fluid might go behind. So the surgeon is on the guard. He goes ahead with the phaco. And at the end of nucleus management, his view is lost because one thing, there's no glow there, and he sees a lot of air bubbles which are there behind the capsule. And now it's difficult to actually check, if you can put the lens properly into the bag. But still, he somehow manages to implant the single piece. But now the action plan is you have to do something before you complete the case, because even the cortex aspiration is not complete. And it's difficult to get this air out like this. So the second best thing that he does, so he decides to go use trocar cannula. The trocar cannula is a great tool, and every cataract surgeon must learn it. It's not very difficult to do it. In this case, first thing he does is to aspirate the air and does a little bit of anterior vitrectomy, clears up the stain, and suddenly the glow starts improving. Makes a huge difference. It's difficult to do phaco when you don't have a glow. And then the trocar is removed. And next, he goes in to get his lens into the bag, and then realizes that there's a lot of cortex there. But now, since it's visible and the glow is present, he manages to do IA and get the lens in the bag. And this is how he manages. Now, this is a case of a complicated cataract, a long-standing uveitis, and the lens has dislocated into the anterior chamber. It's a PMMA lens. So on close examination, you realize that there's a lot of fibrosis around the lens. There's a cyclitic membrane that has developed, which has encroached anteriorly, and it's adherent to the cornea. But on closer examination, we realize that there's still a dead space between that membrane and the corneal endothelium. So the plan here is to go and try and open the bag. Once you open the bag, anteriorly and posteriorly, and separate the optic from it, then it's possible to get the lens out, and the tunnel that is opened is big enough for the optics to come out easily. On the first look, before the surgery, it would look like it's a bad cornea, and keratoplasty is the only way out. But once the lens comes out, and then you go with here, the only difficulty you'll have is if the haptic is stuck into the sulcus, and you try to pull it out, and sometimes it can tear through and cause problems. So you have to rotate the lens in the eye, and once you're sure that the haptics are separated, then you can pull it. Now here what I do is I go between the endothelium and that membrane, inject viscoelastic, and then use micro forceps to very gently peel it, because I know the central endothelium is clear of it. It's stuck in the periphery. And when you can't do it, you can always use a cutter and clear. And to our surprise, the central cornea where it really matters is quite clear. Now, unlike what Amar shows, I took this patient as for a second procedure where I planned the lens and managed to get a reasonably good vision. Her vision was finger counting 1 meter, and from there it almost improved to around 624. Now, this is a case which shows you if you have not approached any case with respect to some of the rules, you can end up with an issue. Now, again, this is not done by me, but I wanted to pick up this case to show how a simple thing like a BX ring, if you're not sure how to use it, you can land up with a problem. Now, this is a case of extreme form of IFIs, and the nucleus is extremely advanced. So doing phaco was an issue here. But what was worse was after the nucleus was managed, when the time came to implanting the lens, one has to be a little careful. In such a crowded eye, you definitely fill the bag, open it up, and stay away from the BX ring. What happens here, the surgeon is finding difficulty in pushing the lens into the bag. And once you lose your cool and you're in a hurry to push it, you just watch carefully now. What happens is he's not able to, so by mistake, he pulls the haptic, BX ring. So now the BX ring has also gone behind the iris, and it is, you don't know whether it is front of the haptic or behind the optic, but it is stuck there. Now it's difficult to get that ring out unless you cut it. So by now the pupil has started coming down. The ring is entangled into the haptic optic junction. So the next best thing that he can do is use scissors and cut it. It'll have to be cut at 2 places to remove it. And since the pupil has started coming down, once the second piece is out, and by this time, it's extremely difficult to get the lens into the bag. So once the second part is out, additional iris hooks are put, the pupil is opened up. But at this stage, it is difficult to refill the bag. Surgeon tries his best to get the haptic in, but as you can see, they are only in the sulcus. It just highlights that a case that could have ended well. Here it ends with the lens in, but the haptics are out. The haptics are in the sulcus, and then the eye is closed. But it's like taking a risk, because if the single piece lens stays in the sulcus, sometimes it can really cause an issue. These are simple cases, not very. Now, this was a pediatrician who had this corneal dystrophy, for which PTK was done. It cleared up for some time and only to recur again. And his vision had dropped drastically. I offered him to repeat the PTK, but he was very sure that he didn't want to go for PTK. Now, these are cases where a simple, oblique light can help you do your rexes, or sometimes it can help you do your phaco as well. It's just that either your assistant or yourself have to hold it or in the most appropriate angle for you to get a view of your rhexis. And in such cases, it is essential that you stain your rhexis. The nucleus is rotated, and when the assistant is holding it, in between you could always switch back and forth to see if at that particular stage, whether your coaxial is giving you better visibility or your oblique light. So as a combination of these two, you complete your nucleus management. But then when it comes to IA, it is always better to go back to your coaxial, because IA is sometimes difficult with a light which has no glow. Well, these are not the kind of cases that we saw Umar and Akia show, but these are some kind of doable cases. Though I thought I would share them for the benefit of some of those, because these are not very difficult, but these are few tricky situations where with little more if you have seen cases done, or if you are in the practice of using, you can certainly use this technique and get satisfactory results. So with this, I would like to stop here and stop sharing the screen, and thank Amar for this opportunity to show whatever little I had to show in disasters. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Suhas. I think that was excellent, showing these various complications which you were showing and these worst case scenarios, and especially the ring when it got stuck. Because one of the problems to tell everyone here is any of these rings, it's not only the BHEX ring, but I've seen this in the Malugan ring or any of them, they can get stuck when you're putting that IUL inside, because that haptic can get stuck onto the ring, this thing, etc. And then we are in trouble. I don't know if Gaurav is there. If he's not there, I'll just move on to another thing which I wanted to cover up, okay, with us here. And basically what I thought, I'll first show you a case so that if Gaurav joins in, we can always give him the space. Now look at this case here. This patient had an injury, and I've sutured up the clear corneal incision. But notice, obviously, something has produced a rupture, obviously. So something has gone through and through the injury cut and gone through that, producing that cataract. So obviously, I will have a PC rupture straight away. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the phacoemulsification. And at this stage, I'm wondering, how do I get out of the problem if there is something behind? And once my phacoemulsification has been done, then you can see I'm going to fix my infusion cannula there. I'm going to do the vitrectomy portion now. So I'm doing a vitrectomy and a cortical removal. Once that is done, now we go inside and do the posterior vitrectomy. And what I wanted to show all of you is, look at this patient. There's a little bit of fluid there in the subretinal space, obviously, and a huge foreign body lying inside, gone through and through. So obviously this has gone through and through the clear corneal incision. I'm catching that and pulling it out. Once I'll pull this foreign body out, you'll see there, it's a wooden stick and it's a large piece present there. So I'm going to now bring this intraocular foreign body outside, bring it above the iris. Now the problem is you need to try to bring it out through the long axis of the foreign body. So you see now the foreign body is lying horizontally, whereas my incision here is in an oblique angle. So using the two hands like a handshake technique, I will manipulate it so that the long axis of the foreign body is in line with the long axis of the forceps. And now subsequently, I will now remove the foreign body. Look at the size of the foreign body also. That's large. It's about 11 millimeters in length. Now, once you have removed this foreign body, the next step for us is What do we do next? Because now we have fixed the foreign body out, but we need to fix this patient with the retinal portion. So I'm just going to do my vitrectomy there. Once I've done my vitrectomy, I will then do the fluid air exchange and if needed, the endo laser. But before that, I would like to first do the intraocular lens. Now, this is a small trick of doing a small iridectomy, which Dr. Athiya showed us before on. Now you can see I'm going to take this haptic inside, externalize the first haptic. Again, you know this technique now very well. Do use a J&J 3-piece IOL because I feel they're much better than the other companies, though I have no financial interest in them. But the haptics are extremely stable. Also, check carefully. See the amount of haptic externalized. It's a lot. You need a lot of haptic externalized. Then you are very sure that there will not be any problem. Once you have done that, take this 26 gauge needle, create the Gabor-Charier's pocket, and tuck the haptics inside there. So here you can see that gone inside, one haptic inside. Now we'll move on to the second haptic also. Both haptics are now inside. Once both haptics are inside, you can use this globe stabilization rod to check where the sclerotomy has been made, assess exactly where the lens is centered or not. Now, once you have done that, obviously there is an iris defect which must have been created by the foreign body itself because it went through and through, not only this thing, it created that mess in the iris also. You just close up that with the fourth row pupiloplasty. And finally, you will have to end it with an endo laser on the retina because there is a retinal break there and you saw the retinal detachment also present there. So we will do a fluid air exchange, drain the subretinal fluid and do an endo laser to complete this case. But the reason I'm showing you this case is that we can do this in a multiple surgeries all in one shot. I tend to always prefer to finish everything in one shot because it makes life easier for the patient. So that's why I tend to finish them all off in one shot. If you're comfortable in it, you can finish it all off like this, exactly how the patient looks. Once I have done this, you'll see now me just going inside, doing the fluid air exchange, endo laser it, and complete this particular case. You can see the endo laser being done. I now see Gaurav Luthra has come because he was there in another hall also. So before I stop sharing, I'd like to tell people about Gaurav Luthra also. Gaurav is also the chairman ARC of the IIRSI, one of the key persons who's holding webinars round the clock for IIRSI and for others also. Gaurav, it's such a pleasure to have you with us. We had Suhas and Dr. Athiya before us on this on the phaco nightmares. And again, I have to thank Gaurav and Suhas, both of you. Just to tell all the delegates, at 6:30, we'll be starting the OPL also. We'd love you to join us there in the Shushruta Hall after this. It will be at 6:30, so we have time now for Gaurav to take it on. All yours, Gaurav.
Thank you so much, sir. And it's really a privilege to be in one of the most cherished courses of the, in the world, like in the ASCRS and everywhere. This is one of the most attended courses. The halls are overflowing with people. So I feel really privileged that I'm part of your course, today. And thank you so much for inviting me over. I'll be showing a few videos of situations where I felt, that I was in a corner and required all my effort to come out of it. Now, this was a patient who was referred to me by one of my colleagues, and she had started the surgery on an intumescent elderly patient who had a floppy iris as well, was having prostate medication. And the moment she started with the surgery, her rhexis ran out and it went under the iris, and she panicked, and then she started converting it into a can opener. And in the meantime, the pupil came down and she did not have access to any devices to kind of dilate the pupil. So she put in an air bubble and referred it off to me. A patient came to me 2 days later with the diabetic and was on Urimax and all the work. So you can imagine that I could not assess this patient. I had nothing to go by. And, as always, you are of the fear that the patient who has been referred, the surgeon always tends to underplay what he has done inside. So all I had to go with was an ultrasound to see that the posterior segment was clear and there was no nucleus drop. And that's all I knew about this patient. So as we started off, So as we started off, I created new incisions. She had made an incision superiorly over here, which was a sclerocorneal incision. So I decided to make new incisions for myself, and had to basically decide what was, the situation inside after the rhexis had run away. I was not sure whether it had gone to the posterior capsule or not, but the way she described, there was all possibility of that having happened as well. So once we went through with this initial part, I went and stained so that I could see the capsule, whatever was there. The only good thing was that she had told me that there had been no vitreous at all. That was something that she really emphasized, that I did not have any vitreous present. So that was a little bit of a relief. And of course, once we did the staining of the capsule, then I used Viscoat to see how to get this air bubble out and have better visualization to assess where we were. And as expected, it had been a flag sign kind of a situation, which she had further compounded by trying to do a can opener capsulotomy. And I decided to go in with hooks, because in these situations, putting a ring can sometimes be challenging. It can, have the rhexis extend further because it's already a broken rhexis, and the hooks have much more control in these situations. So always fall back on hooks. And once we've engaged the hooks, the visualization becomes much better. And yes, the capsule was all in shreds, so I had to just kind of remove some of those shreds and convert it into a proper can opener. But I was scared because, these flaps, I should have probably wanted to tear them and try to fashion some kind of a rhexis. But, all that was left was some shreds of the capsule. Now, this makes it very difficult, because if you're going in with a phaco probe now, you have these multiple small capsular fragments lying all around, and it's very easy. And then the nucleus is really nicely stuck, so it's a sticky cataract now, which is usually what happens if you have left it inside for 2 days after attempting a cataract surgery. And at this point, then I have to try and see if I can, with minimum manipulation, if I can crack this nucleus and bring out the fragments, one by one, without distorting the globe too much and without applying too much pressure. It's a relatively hard cataract, and I have to go slow and easy, and make sure that I don't have any forces of lateral separation. So I'm doing a little bit of trenching to see if I can debulk the nucleus in the middle and then get a crack. I have already got one crack actually, and then I also want to be sure that the nucleus rotates and I can get a grip and be able to crack it into some few more pieces. It's, as you can understand, it's a sticky kind of cataract, does not crack very easily, and I don't want to do too much of lateral separation anyway, because that will cause the the anterior capsular tears to run to the posterior capsule, and then I'll be sitting with the nucleus drop to deal with. And so somehow we managed to get all these chunks out, and it's a very, very slow process. I don't want you to keep watching forever, so you've got the idea. Get the nucleus fragments out there, and I was able to reach this stage where the nucleus fragments were gone, and then now it was left to be very meticulous and remove the cortex. And yes, again, it requires you to be careful because you have all these capsular flaps. So I end up removing the cortex. Once the cortex is all gone, then I'm in a better situation now, and put in viscoelastic to make an assessment that I want to use a 3-piece lens. And now you can see that I'm holding the iris with my left hand, because I know that this iris is going to tent up and come to the incision. So it might, traumatize. My cartridge might just go through the iris, or my IOL may go through the iris. So I'm going to push that down with the left hand and then introduce the cartridge inside. And this is how the 3-piece lenses should always be inserted. Don't do a wound assisted insertion. Now you can see that while I did my best and released the lens in a way that my haptic was in the right orientation, but once inside it twists, and I'm trying my best to get it back. And this is what worst case scenarios are always like. When you are in a tight situation and you don't want these things to happen. Now I'll have to flip a 3-piece lens with a broken rhexis and broken bag. And it's not a great feeling, and I'm distending it with viscoelastic. And as I flip it inside with holding my breath, and I managed to do it, it happens, it moves to one side, but I know that I've been able to complete it. And as I bring it back, I think that my worries are all over now, and my capsular bag is intact. I put in the haptic properly inside the bag. Even if it goes in the sulcus, I'm not too bothered. It's a 3-piece lens, and I managed to put the whole lens inside. When by the time I put it inside, that haptic which had gone and touched the iris when I flipped the lens has caused a huge bleed. So these are the worst case scenarios that you have to live with, because you tackle one thing and the other one comes up, and then you tackle, because these eyes are irritated eyes. They've already been having post-op inflammation for almost 2 days, so everything bleeds to touch and it's very friable. So you have to tackle that, and using positive pressure, you have to ensure that the bleed stops and you position the IL well. And once that is through, then you can probably breathe a sigh of relief. And this is how I was able to complete this. And in the end, it looked fine. And the paradise regained, as Dr. Amar likes to call it. I've learned so much from him that, it's holding me on. I'll just share one more case, sir. This is again a learning case where I'm ending up making a lot of mistakes. I think Amar sir has already seen this once before, but all the same, it teaches a lot about some of the new techniques that we tend to devise and then go wrong with. So this was a patient who was one-eyed, and at first eye had been lost to following a keratoplasty for a bad opacity, and patient had gone on to develop a failed graft which was operated a second time, and then eventually that eye went into phthisis. So the second eye, which had been about 624 once we started following him up, had gradually gone down to finger counting, and he was not ready to get operated, neither for the cataract nor for his cornea, and he was really scared of a corneal transplant. So my cornea surgeon said that, sir, maybe you can just, he had 624 vision before the cataract became advanced, so maybe we should attempt to remove the cataract and give him at least 2 lines of vision. So we decided not to do a triple procedure, and we went with the cataract surgery and use the chandelier illumination, and this really gives a great view, and you can actually see through these really dense opacities. And I've seen wonderful videos, and I've myself done 3-4 cases like this, and I was quite happy with the way this thing works out. But I was not prepared for the worst case scenario that I was going to encounter here, so please keep watching. And so it's really nice to be able to do a good rhexis under this retro illumination from the chandelier. And once that is done, you can proceed with the cataract surgery with some kind of visualization which you otherwise did not have at all. And as I went through with the cataract surgery, I was happy that I'll be able to make a difference to this patient. I did a gentle hydrodissection, and I started cracking the nucleus, and things were going well. And then as I was operating, suddenly everything went dark, and I didn't know what happened. So what had happened was that the chandelier had slipped out suddenly, and it was probably the assistant had not supported it with something to the drape. So as it slipped out, everything went dark for a moment. We put it back, but probably as the chandelier slipped out, it rubbed against the posterior capsule and caused a PC defect. Now this is all in retrospect, because the moment I went in to operate again, we suddenly had a situation where the nucleus was not visible anymore. It had gone back. And we were in with a situation where we were under, a disaster situation. It was 9 o'clock at night. The retina surgeon was not available, and this was a one-eyed patient who had, delayed surgery for almost 3 years. So SOS calls to the retina surgeon. I ended up doing an anterior vitrectomy and prepared the situation for the surgeon and put in iris hooks because the pupil had come down, and the VR surgeon came and with almost zero visualization through the cornea. As you can imagine, the nucleus had to be removed. There were 3 big chunks, and they were then removed through this very, very small window in the cornea through which the surgeon could see. It required all the skills of the retina surgeon, and a lot of thanks to, as a cataract surgeon, you are very grateful when the retina surgeon can come to your rescue. So while this was done, a day 1 post-op patient looked like this, and 7 weeks post-op looked like that. Eventually, the cornea surgeon had to intervene because the patient had only regained about less than 660 of vision, and went ahead with the keratoplasty and was able to put in an IOL in the sulcus, which I had left intact for the surgeon. And she was able to get a slightly better result than what I could achieve with my cataract surgery. And eventually the patient did fairly well. And this is how he looked. And eventually post-op, he did pretty fairly well and regained about 636 parts vision. So I'll stop here, sir. And I think
we have time. Gaurav, you have time.
Okay, so I can show one more case, sir.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So this is one patient which I wanted to share, which was a challenging case for me. This was a patient, again, you can probably see that there is somehow the videos are coming very dark today for me. And I don't know if it's dark there as well, or it's just my laptop which is showing some less illumination.
It is dark. I don't know why.
It is dark, right? So anyway, something is wrong with maybe the display or something, but let me just go back. This was a hard brown cataract with a small LPI, a laser PI in the periphery. This patient had a chronic angle closure and was having again a very, very hard cataract with a floppy iris. So we went in to operate and try to chop this cataract. Even while we had just started the surgery, the pupil started coming down, and patient was very uncooperative. You saw that shake, did you? I mean, just watch how the patient is going to violently move the head. This patient was moving all through the surgery. It was like an earthquake. And to add to the situation which was happening inside the eye, I had to literally hold the patient's head with my 2 hands so that the patient would not, suddenly jerk the head as I was trying to crack this really hard nucleus. And it always happens that when you are working against all odds, everything seems to add up. And I was able to then dissect out this endonucleus, which I like to do when there's a very hard cataract. If I have a small endonucleus dissected out, I will typically want to remove it. It creates more space and allows you room to crack the posterior plate, and also debulks the nucleus so that when very hard cataracts can be separated. Now, this is the point where I had to take a decision whether I wanted to, put in a ring or some iris hooks to do. And you can see how the patient is moving around all over the place. After every few seconds, I have to kind of recenter his head. And I was able to then gradually remove all these fragments. And I thought that, again, this was a one-eyed patient. So it was a very, very, critical kind of a case where I wanted to be sure that I did not make a mistake of any kind. So I was able to remove all the small chunks finally, because once you have 1 or 2 chunks out, it becomes much easier to handle these, and most surgeons can today handle these. But now at this point, I thought that things are over for me, and I started aspirating the cortex. And as I started doing that, I suddenly got the feeling that the whole capsular bag is coming with it. So I had to pause and then, put some phenocaine in there. And patient, you can see how the patient is shaking and moving and didn't want me to operate anymore. And I go back and put in some viscoelastic and deepen the bag. I have to see whether the bag is intact so that I can put in a CTR. I'm not sure that the bag is absolutely intact because the cortex is really badly stuck. I really want to put in a CTR, but I want to create some space and see that, the CTR will not go right behind into the vitreous cavity. So I'm trying to remove at least some cortex with that bimanual method. And you can see that I'm trying to rope in the cortex, which is very badly stuck to the PC, use a bimanual, trying to support the capsular bag with my irrigating handpiece so that it doesn't come into this aspiration port. And you can see how it bulges forward. The moment I come out, the PC just bulges forward and comes and touches the cornea. And I'm suspecting a PC break. But I then decide to put in a CTR because I'm relatively sure that there isn't. It's just a capsule which is very, very loose. And I'm able to then put in the CTR, and that makes life much easier. Now, this is when the situation becomes a little easier, and I can remove the rest of the cortex and get the cortex out and see how badly stuck it is. And however, this is where you start feeling good as a surgeon, that once you've gone through this whole thing and the patient is so uncooperative and you want to now put in the lens, and thankfully the lens goes in smoothly. And thank God for small mercies, because when they add up, they really add up, and then don't want to leave behind any small fibers. And by this time, because we've manipulated the wound quite a bit, we are worried that the wound may be a little leaky, but it goes off well. So we are able to complete this, and the patient did really well. So I think, sir,
Thank you very much, Gaurav. That's very interesting. One question I have for you is, this endocapsular ring stabilizes the bag. Many people are putting routinely endocapsular ring in toric IOLs.
Yes.
So what is your take on that? Can you tell the delegates?
So I think, sir, in pediatric toric IOLs, I also put CTRs routinely, or even with the eyes where there is a coloboma, small coloboma, because those are the eyes which require a toric, and many times the toric will rotate very easily. Or if you have a very high myo with a very, very loose big bag, where there is a possibility that the toric IOL will rotate. So putting a CTR can be very useful in those cases. But
Suhas
I don't.
is also there with us there. Suhas, we were just discussing about endocapsular rings, being put in patients of toric IOL. So we have any comments of yours on endocapsular ring in toric IOLs?
Well, I would put it only if it's a myope or who documented bigger bag, but otherwise I
Not routinely.
No.
Any other comments now? Final comments from you and from Gaurav, both of you. We still have just 2 minutes left. So I'd like to have final comments, Atya, Gaurav, and Suhas.
I wanted to ask Gaurav, Gaurav, in your case, when you found that cortex was very much stuck on the posterior capsule, you decided to put endocapsular ring then try. But there was always that scare that with endocapsular ring in and cortex still present, the cortex would, if it, sometimes it gets stuck behind the endocapsular ring. So what do you have to say on that?
So in fact, that's the reason why I delayed putting in the CTR, because if I had put it in earlier, the bag would have got distended and I would have been much easier because the capsule would not have come into the pot. But I wanted to get as much cortex out as possible before introducing the CTR. And so it's like a catch-22 situation. If you want the bag to be kind of distended, you want to put in the CTR, but then it'll trap the cortex. But I think with modern ways of removing the cortex, it's much easier to remove even once the CTR is in. So you have to have that correct timing when as late as you can and as early as you need it, kind of.
What about those special CTRs from Anderson? I think she's Anderson.
I think Bonnie's a very good idea, but I think we'll discuss that personally in off thing because we are finishing off the time now. So I think I'd like to thank all of you and the delegates for attending this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amar sir. Thank you, Haldipurkar sir, Atiya ma'am. Grateful.
Hello. Hi.
I'll also like to quickly take this opportunity to thank all the speakers for sharing their valuable virtual time with us. Thank you so much.